Murder Mystery and the Alien Creatures, written and illustrated by Stewart. To Mama, I hope you have a Merry Christmas and I really like your bagels. Lots of love, Stewart. Chapter 1: The Christmas Eve Murders. It was Christmas Eve in a small town in Wales. It was a very colorful town. There were lots of shops decorated for Christmas. It was cold and snow was falling, making the town look very magical. Menorahs were lit and placed in many windows. Most people were warm and cozy in their houses sleeping. A murderer was going from house to house on one block, killing people. The murderer got to the final house on the block. It was a two-story, semi-detached house. It was dark green with light green accents. In the living room window, a Christmas tree and a menorah were visible. The murderer looked inside through the window and saw a young boy who looked to be 5 years old, but was actually 7. The murderer climbed the drain pipe to the top of the house and started to go down the chimney. The boy was small with blonde hair and was waiting by the chimney for Santa. Suddenly a person with black hair, red eyes, and rusty armor appeared in the fireplace. The boy was scared. He ran to the kitchen to get the longest and sharpest bread knife that he could find. He went back into the living room with the knife, only to see the man in rusty armor going upstairs. The boy ran up the stairs to stop him. The man in rusty armor saw that the boy had a knife and pulled out his own. A fight started. The boy kicked the man in rusty armor and nearly cut him on the eye. The man in rusty armor retreated, shouting, "I'll be back!" The noise of the fight woke up the boy's parents. They all went downstairs, and the boy told them how he had fought off the man in rusty armor. His parents were very proud of him. Chapter 2: The First Clue. On the next block over, and on Christmas Day, Ruby woke up. She had brown hair, glasses, and was wearing red pajamas. She went downstairs, turned on the TV, and learnt that there had been several murders on the block next to hers. A small boy with blonde hair was telling the tale about how he saved his family by fighting off a man with black hair, red eyes, and rusty armor. It was not just one house, but nearly all of them. She went outside to check the mail. She saw that there was a letter with a tag on the back. Reading in the letter, it said,
"Ruby, you have 24 hours to solve this mystery. I committed last night's murders. Look in the first house and you will find your first clue. P.S. If you don't solve this mystery in 24 hours, this entire town will blow up. Ha 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 ha."
Ruby felt really bad. She needed to solve this mystery before the whole town blew up. She was not from this town, but still wanted to solve this mystery before people got hurt. She went to the first house to find her clue. As she entered the house, she saw a person surrounded by dry ice, lying dead in the middle of the living room. Lying on the ground next to the person was another letter. This one said,
"Go to the rugby game. It is Wales versus Australia. I will be waiting for you there, but beware, I have traps and tricks."
She immediately went to her car and drove to the rugby game. She got there and saw the referee was waiting for her. His name was Nigel. Ruby went over to say hello to him and ask if he had seen anything suspicious. He pulled his disguise off, and Ruby saw that he was in fact the man in rusty armor. Chapter 3: The Last Clue. The man in rusty armor snapped his fingers. Nothing happened for 4 seconds. But then a cage started to rise up around Ruby. She was able to jump away from the cage, but in doing so she fell into a pit. The pit was 16 feet deep. "Ha ha!" laughed the man in rusty armor. "You fell into my trap," he said. "I'm too clever for you," and he drove away in a big green tractor. Ruby noticed there was still a shovel in the pit. The man in rusty armor had forgotten to take it out when he was digging it. Ruby started to dig, and after an hour she was able to get out of the pit. As she walked back to her car, she realized that going to the rugby game was a trap, and that she needed to be more careful in the future. When she got into the car, she noticed an envelope on the passenger seat. She read the letter inside.
"The next clue will be very guarded. Go to the sewer at 1 o'clock this afternoon."
She went to a nearby restaurant that was a favorite of hers to have something to eat. She ate at this restaurant every time she visited this village because she loved the food. It was closed. She wondered why it was closed, as it had always been open on Christmas Day. Looking through the window, she saw a dead body lying at the counter. "Run!" said a nearby voice. "There's a killer on the loose." "I know," said Ruby. "I'm trying to catch him." "Well, good luck," said the person. Looking at her watch, Ruby saw that it was nearly 1 o'clock. She did not have much time to get to the sewer. When she got to the sewer, she went inside the main building and saw a kid in a cage. She noticed that it was the boy from the television that had saved his family. "Please help me," he said. Using a hair clip, Ruby freed the boy. "Who are you, and how did you get caught?" said Ruby. "My name is Stuart Hyland. He caught me when he came back, the same way he caught my sister last Christmas." Seeing a trail, they both decided to follow it. It led to a lab. It was a circular room with green walls made from metal. Hanging on the walls were pictures of unknown planets that were spinning around. A hole in the roof led to a room that housed a rocket ship. They could see the bottom of the rocket ship through the hole. It was very large. Chapter 4: The Hologram. They saw the man in rusty armor, along with a short girl with brown hair. "Ruby, that's my sister, Charlie!" exclaimed Stuart. The man in rusty armor then took off his armor. As he did, he stopped being a man and turned into a lizard person creature. It was huge and strong. It looked to be about 10 feet tall. The creature grabbed Stuart and started licking him with his long tongue. "Stop that!" shouted Charlie. She threw a rock at the creature. The creature roared and dropped Stuart. Then the creature lunged at Ruby. Ruby dodged the creature. She saw some knives hanging from the wall and ran to them. Grabbing a throwing knife, she aimed it at the creature and threw it. It was a direct hit. The creature dropped to the ground. Lots of blood spilled out of the creature, and it was dead. Charlie explained to Ruby and Stuart that the creature was actually from another planet and was trying to take over the village and then the rest of the planet. They had stopped him. They saw a button on a weird-looking machine. They pushed it, and a hologram came on. Another lizard person appeared as a hologram. Ruby spoke. "We've taken down your agent. You cannot take over this planet." "Oh, yes, I can," said the hologram before it ended abruptly. Ruby took Stuart and Charlie back to their house. They were thankful that the man in rusty armor had been stopped. No one mentioned that he was actually a lizard person from another planet. Ruby got home and had a nice cup of watermelon mint tea. On her table was a note that had not been there in the morning. It read,
"We're just getting started."
Chapter 5: The Creature's Return. The next day, Ruby woke up early. She went to the airport to go home. She realized that it had been a very bad Christmas. She said goodbye to Stuart and Charlie before getting her ticket. She went through security and found a chair to wait for her flight. Just then there was an announcement. Her flight had been canceled because the pilot was dead. Ruby told the local security people that she would like to look at the crime scene. She was allowed onto the plane. She went onto the flight deck and saw the dead pilot. He had been choked to death by a lot of chains. All of a sudden, the lights in the airplane turned on. A voice came over the intercom and said, "More of my soldiers will come and attack." Then the creatures burst onto the plane. They were small and thin with 6-foot-long tongues. Ruby was grabbed from behind. She fought off her attacker and ran from the plane and was chased through the airport by many creatures. Eventually, she made it to her car. Stuart quickly pulled out his bread knife and fought off the creatures. He managed to cut off one creature's head. Purple blood spilled out, and the creature's head turned to dust. Ruby got the car started, and they sped off. Charlie had not managed to get into the car, so Ruby slammed on the brakes, and Charlie ran to the car and jumped in. Off they went again. Chapter 6: The Book. Soon they arrived back at Charlie and Stuart's house. Their next-door neighbor was in his garden. His name was Captain Prickle. He was 5'7", wore glasses, and had very little hair. Ruby introduced herself and told him of the adventure at the airport. The captain told Ruby that it was his father who was killed on the plane. A small pod, about 5 feet in diameter, blasted from the sky like a meteor. It landed in the captain's garden. When the smoke cleared, Ruby approached it carefully to investigate. She pried open the hatch and saw that it was empty except for a small gray book. Ruby opened the book. Suddenly, what seemed like a tornado erupted from the book, and they were all sucked into it. The book slammed shut. Chapter 7: The Tornadoes. When the tornado cleared, they realized they were not in the captain's garden anymore. They could see 3 planets in the sky. They were, in fact, on an alien world. It was dusty and rocky with black clouds in the sky. When Stuart jumped, he noticed that he went up 12 feet and fell very slowly, at about 2 miles per hour. Charlie liked what she saw, so jumped as well. She went up a little higher. While they were jumping and wondering what to do, a tentacle burst from the dusty ground. It was black and slimy. A huge head followed the tentacle. It had glowing red eyes, and where its mouth and nose should have been were a lot of small tentacles. While they were looking at this new creature, another tentacle rose from the ground. The two tentacles grabbed them and pulled them under the ground into a huge cavern. They could then see the creature more slowly. Its lower half looked like a giant squid's lower half. The creature let go of them. They slowly fell to the ground. On the ground were saber-toothed tigers, each with 4 glowing red eyes. Could this day get any worse? They saw a path leading away from the tentacles and the tigers, and they ran towards it. As they ran, another tornado struck. This one transported them back to the captain's garden. "Can we do that again?" yelled Stuart. "Yeah," yelled Charlie. "That was fun." Ruby decided that opening the book for a second time was not a very good idea. As they stood in the garden, they saw that creatures from the airport were coming their way. "Oh dear, time to go," said Ruby. Chapter 8: The Giant Strawberry. Ruby grabbed the book and they all ran down the road away from the creatures. As they got to the end of the road, a rocket ship landed in front of them. It was only a small ship, so they were easily able to avoid it and carry on running. A long tongue burst out of the rocket ship and wrapped itself around them all. Charlie managed to escape the tongue. Ruby followed. The two of them were able to help Stuart and the captain escape too. They carried on running, now looking at the sky for more rocket ships. A voice from the rocket ship yelled, "Get back here!" The creature emerged from the spaceship. It had a tongue that could reach for miles. The body looked like a gecko. It ran towards them faster than a cheetah. It got close enough to snatch the book from Ruby and then ran off in another direction, yelling, "I'm the king and I can get whatever I want." "You forgot your manners!" yelled Stuart as the creature ran off. The captain pulled the rest of them down the same street that the creature went, and they followed after it, all the while getting farther and farther behind. Charlie noticed that the sky was filling with other rocket ships, and they were all flying in the same direction. Stuart ran inside a building, went to the roof to see where the rocket ships were going. When he returned, he told them they were heading in the direction of Snowdonia National Park. Ruby suggested that they go to her car and follow. After a while, they were in the park and they could see the rocket ships landing in a large clearing. They parked some distance away and silently crept toward the edge of a clearing. Suddenly, Stuart ran into the clearing. "What?" yelled Ruby. "I smell something sweet," he yelled back as he ran. As he got closer to the center of the clearing, he saw that there was a giant strawberry which had the book on top of it. Surrounding the strawberry were a lot of creatures worshiping the book. Charlie ran toward Stuart, trying to save him from being seen by the creatures. Thankfully, the creatures were in deep worship and did not notice any of them. Ruby then realized that the book was key to destroying the creatures and saving the planet. "We have to destroy the book," said Ruby. Stuart gave Charlie the bread knife and she headed toward the strawberry. She needed to get through the ring of creatures first, though. She tried slipping through the ring, but the king noticed her and shouted for the other creatures to stop her. The others tried to create a diversion while Charlie climbed the strawberry. Charlie climbed to the top of the strawberry, grabbed the book, and threw it and the bread knife to Ruby. Ruby used the bread knife to stab the cover of the book. Suddenly the book flew open and a tornado appeared as it had done when Ruby had first opened the book. However, this time it only sucked in the creatures. When the last of them was gone, the book slammed shut and fell to the ground. Chapter 9: Going Home. The four heroes sat in silence for a while. Then they walked back to Ruby's car. The drive back into town was quiet as they all thought about what had happened. "I'd still like to eat that strawberry," said Stuart. Everyone laughed. Ruby dropped the captain at his house. The rocket ship had vanished from his garden. "Time to get back to weeding," said the captain as he got out of the car. Next, Ruby dropped Stuart and Charlie at their house. Their parents were very happy to see them. Finally, Ruby was able to drive to the airport, where she had a nice cup of watermelon mint tea before catching her flight home. The end.